Chapter 7 Photography. What is photography? Well, basically, it is drawing with light. If you look at the breakdown of the word, you see here on the slide photos, light, graphos, drawing. So it's basically drawing with light. When I was younger, you literally had to consider the amount of light you had while taking a photograph because of the way that traditional film reacts. We're now living in more of a digital age, so the rules are a little more different today. But traditionally, drawing with light. The basis for photography is actually started under the investigation of the camera obscura. And I gave you a video on the camera obscura. I recommend watching it. It literally means dark room. And it was a way for artists to aid themselves while trying to represent objects, a way to basically document the object so they could try to sketch it or paint it later. So you'll notice here in the diagram how the camera obscura works. This was the foundation for the invention of photography. It uses a lot of the same principles that the camera obscura was experimenting with, essentially. Basically, we see photography being developed in the early 1800s, primarily around the time of the 1830s. By the end of the 1800s, it is very much a sort of concrete discipline or a concrete medium at that time. And essentially what you're doing is using light-sensitive materials to record images. The first type of photography that's recognized in photo history is the daguerreotype. And it's named after, of course, the man who created it, which is Daguerre. And funny enough, Daguerre invents photography, essentially. And he actually, instead of keeping the sort of copyright right to photography as an idea, so gave it as a gift to the nation of France, where he was a citizen, as a present, essentially, so so anyone could use photo. So that's an interesting aside about him. You might wonder why you look at a lot of daguerreotypes and you look at things that are still lifes, essentially, a collection of objects, because daguerreotype exposure times are very long. So you wanted to pick something that wasn't going to move around a lot on you. So how is this done? What happens here, and you'll notice there's a lot of science, is that you have basically copper plates that are coated with materials like silver, for instance, that are made light sensitive through exposure to iodine vapor. After light exposure, images are developed by treating the plate with mercury. Notice that this is very science heavy and also very dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. Very technical. I don't think I would have been a very good early photographer. There's a lot of steps and a lot of dangerous materials. You would fix your image by bathing it in a solution. And what's really interesting about daguerreotypes is they're unique objects. The plate literally becomes the unique object. You can't make duplicates like you can with later film as you probably consider it. So these plates would become unique objects. And as I mentioned before, one of the downsides of early photography, something like a daguerreotype, for instance, is the longer exposure times that the process demanded. So you see a lot of, again, still lifes, things that aren't going to move on you. Portraiture did not become common until much, much later. And when it did, actually, and I'll show you here a second, here's the daguerreotype of a portrait. Notice it's a unique object. Normally something what they would do is put it in a little case like this that the person would carry around with them. But this is the only, I guess we say print, because it is the singular plate object. It's the unique object. So the person could carry it around this cute little carrying case. Now you might say, well, this is a person. Notice she is not smiling. For a very good reason. The exposure times had started to drop a bit around this time, but you still would not ask your subject to do something that needed to be held for long periods of time, like smile, because if you had to hold it for 60 seconds, 120, whatever it is, you might start to move and then your lips would look blurry. So that's why people look so severe. I was teaching a photo history class once, and a student asked me, everyone in the 1800s always looks severe and like, mean or tired or, just not very pleasant people. And I said, well, it's because of this. They can't, they couldn't move. So, and they were like, oh, I was like, yeah, there's a very good reason why they all look so very serious. Not because they were probably very serious, but because they couldn't smile. They also would use braces on their necks to keep them static or still. So often the woman, for instance, would have a brace or a little element to hold her neck still right behind her, holding her in place so she wouldn't move around a lot. So it's intriguing to think of how you had to manipulate these things. Of course, later we moved to the camera itself, where you would load film. And funny enough, early cameras, if you do the equivalency on the price, I bet it'd be around like $150 today. Early cameras, you had the film preloaded inside the camera. You would take your photos and then you would have to ship it back to Kodak in Rochester, New York, where they would develop the prints for you, reload your film in your camera, and send the camera back to you. So there was no way to load the film yourself. So just again, a funny little detail about early cameras. Now, what makes a camera? What are the parts of the camera? You have the camera body. It's the light tight box. You have the lens. It focuses the light onto your light sensitive material. You have your shutter. It controls your exposures. You have your aperture. It controls the amount of light that enters the camera. And you have your viewfinder, how you see your subject. So this is all detailed in your text, but again, this is a walkthrough of what exactly makes up the camera, right? And it makes it work. And all of these elements, for the most part, can be manipulated. You can manipulate your shutter to mess with exposures. You can manipulate your aperture. So there's ways that photographers have played with the elements of the camera to make different kinds of prints, essentially. And with film, you'll notice this is a film negative. You have the same pros that you have with printmaking, which is you can print multiple copies of the same image over and over and over again. Here's some early photography. This is Fox Talbot, The Open Door. And I would say that with this, he kind of moves beyond the daguerreotype because he's giving it a little bit of an artistic flair. Notice that because the broom is at an asymmetrical angle, it's using asymmetry. Again, if you think about it's diagonal, it's going like this. It gives a bit of visual interest to the piece that if the broom, think about it, was up against the frame flush like this, I don't think you'd find the image half as intriguing to your eyes. There's a little bit of an arty flair if you think about how you make a composition.